boy, I bet you're thinking this is just me speculating again without any reason. Okay, well, it might be a little bit, but there are some home truths that Red Bull are now starting to realise. That they probably have to accept they are going to lose the thing that Christian Horner values most. It's reported from an anonymous tipster via Blip, the Swiss publication, that Red Bull can forget about this championship, and that it's all about ensuring that Max defends his title for a 4th year in a row. Now, supposedly, this is coming from a high up in terms of the Red Bull senior management structure, and I know that you're probably getting your own phones of doubt at the ready and going, hang on a minute, Law, are you really going to be relying on this singular source from a Swiss publication? I mean, okay, you have a point, but to be fair, it's at least not The Telegraph, it's not from a Dutch newspaper or anything like that. I'm going off of all the stuff that I've been hearing from Red Bull over the last couple of months, not just from people speculating about Red Bull. There are some very keen signs here that I think that the RB20 is not long in terms of development, and that the team are probably going to be looking at cutting their losses at some point and instead looking to next year to solve most of their woes. I think it's becoming clearer by the race that Red Bull are struggling to figure out the core issue behind why the RB20 has turned upside down, as said by Max Verstappen. And look how far we've come from the days the car was launched, eh? Where I said they'd already won the season. Oh, how things change. I think that their opinions really value more the people who are involved with the RB20, them saying it's gotten a little bit too complex and that there is a problem, it's gotten worse. Yeah, this isn't people making it up, and I bet you right now Sergio Perez is really relieved. He's the only person who I think is benefiting from the woes of Red Bull. And that's because he's pointing the finger at Max and effectively saying, I'm not making it up, now Max is struggling, so get off my back, okay? In Checo's mind, with Max struggling right now, with issues that he's been having for most of the season, then it would stand to reason that they would keep Sergio Perez around, so that means he might have more insight, and that might lead to a solution, and then all would be hunky-dory, and Checo would be playing his part for the team. And of course, Max has fallen from the likes of 2nd to 6th, whereas Checo has remained about 6th, 7th, 8th, so there's really not been much change, so why would you get rid of him? Well, that doesn't seem to have washed with the public, really, and Max Verstappen has explained that the Italian Grand Prix in particular did not help matters because the car was low on power. They had to reduce the settings to make sure the car was brought home for some reason, and they're only now trying to figure out the diagnostics, so that was on top of the fact that the car has become a problem in terms of balance. So I'm sorry, Checo, it might be a little bit premature to then just point the finger at Max and say, hey, just look at him too. So yeah, Max couldn't really even try and get to the podium even if he wanted to, or had the perfect strategy or pit stop, which he also didn't have. It seems to be multiple factors behind Max Verstappen and Red Bull's struggles, and they just look a little bit ropier than they did before. And Checo just seems to sum up the team quite well, because he's quite stumped about the present situation. The team are indeed a bit confused, but believes that they will solve the issue. Now, okay, I appreciate the optimism, Checo, but we all know which side of your bread is buttered. You are very loyal to Christian Horner, because throughout all of those investigations and the inquiries, you kept your mouth shut, and you were rewarded with a contract extension. So the party line that you are following, it's a little bit tone deaf right now. Right now, they need to focus about a solution instead of just following blind optimism. Besides, I think we're all aware of the aftermath of the investigation into Christian Horner, the bitter aftertaste amongst the higher-ups, as well as all the senior staff that have left the team in the last couple of years, so this is a sustainable problem and it's only getting worse. Because the problems have manifested with a car that is just not working anymore. That the domination that they had in 2022 and 2023 has just eluded them, and that everyone else has caught up. And could this be down to Adrian Newey leaving and them not having their guiding light anymore? Oh, I mean, possibly, but not exclusively. You could attribute Red Bull's wobble with the RB20 to previous Adrian Newey divorces with teams, since Williams and McLaren saw drop-offs in the latter phases of their respective stints with the designer. I mean, not necessarily falling off, but not as strong as near the start of their time together in the honeymoon period. Well, hang on, whoa. What about 1996, Law? Williams won both championships. You can't say that. Adrian Newey had already left. Well, that is a very fair point, but you've got to consider that in 1996, Williams didn't really have that much in terms of competition. Benetton were going through the aftermath of losing Schumacher, Ross Brawn, so they were already having their problems. Ferrari were starting to rebuild themselves. If you look at the constructors table, Williams, it wasn't even close. Williams had no real competition except maybe Michael Schumacher at points. However, it's not as easy as that, as the cause of Newey leaving stemmed from internal politics inside the teams themselves. It wasn't just revolving around him, it was the fact that the team itself was just going through a really tumultuous phase, and the same thing applied here. internal politics at Red Bull got to a point, post the death of Dietrich Mateschitz, where Adrian Newey just went, you know what, I can't stand this, I just want to work, I'm done. I've done what I can, I'm leaving for pastures new. And we all think it's going to be Aston Martin, but it's too early to say about that. But the key difference here, though, is that we found out about the struggles at Red Bull much sooner than we did in the past. Most of the time with Williams and McLaren, you'd find out about it in autobiographies years later, whereas right now, it's being played out in real time, so the impact of this departure has been even more significant. And also, I think the departure of Rob Marshall, who was in charge of engineering at Red Bull, was just as significant, if not more so, than Adrian leaving, since the issue seems to be as much of a mechanical problem as it is an aero one. The car seems to have gone off in the wrong direction, which is something that Max Verstappen himself explains right here. Ahem. Both championships are not realistic. It's Max saying this, not me. It's basically up to the team now to come with a lot of changes, because we basically went from a very dominant car to an undriveable car in the space of, what, 6 to 8 months? That is very weird for me, and need to really turn the car upside down. The car is undriveable. It's a massive balance problem that we have, and that of course is not only over one lap, but also in the race. I've always said that I would have liked for Adrian to stay, but it's not about that now, because last year we had a great car, which was the most dominant car ever, and we basically turned it into a monster. So we have to turn it around. We have to just keep pushing and work flat out. There is no excuse. Well, say what you will about Max Verstappen, at least he is aware of the fact that the time for talk is over and that something needs to be done. And even though Max does note his preference in keeping Newey around, and he's even quoted him being part of a second family, figuratively, however, he has seemingly moved on from that now since it's happened, and Max seems like a guy who deals in absolutes. Adrian isn't there anymore, get over it. That being said though, Red Bull do seem like at a genuine loss as to where to go and fix the problem. Horner himself has said that trying to fix one problem causes another problem to manifest itself. Then they go to fix that problem, the original problem comes back, or a brand new one comes in altogether. They just can't lock one thing down. And the whole thing about Max Verstappen talking about balance, that probably makes sense. You shift the balance, it then becomes kilted off in another direction. It's a real valid problem. It's not just a curb riding issue. It just seems to be an unstable car. And I do feel like some karmic forces are at play here, because at the beginning of the year, Pierre Vacher did say that Adrian Newey's oversight was irreplaceable, and then that got downplayed quite severely by Horner and Vacher. So which one is it? Is Adrian Newey replaceable, or is he not? The car has now gone askew with the latest updates, and the team having to mix and match parts, as well as create a Frankenflaw based on the positive feedback from the Dutch Grand Prix, when Checo was faster than Verstappen at points. It's really starting to beg the question, should Red Bull just simply cut their losses and admit defeat right now, instead of just going further into the rabbit warren of parts and pieces and just confusion? Well, if that anonymous tipster is anything to go by, that might be the case. That, you know what? It's just getting more and more complicated, and we're headed toward the end of the season, where you're now starting to have to think about next year, and then what do? Do you just struggle on, and then you end up in even more of a back foot next year, or just give up? In my mind, I think Red Bull should give up, because right now it's just getting even messier. And I'm not saying that as a McLaren fan, I'm just wanting Red Bull to actually get themselves back into a position where we can have an ultra-competitive 2025 with 4 teams vying for wins from race 1 in Australia. Things at Red Bull will mostly have to revert back to what it was like circa 2021, when Mercedes did enough to win the team title, but just missed out on the driver's title. Red Bull ploughed all their efforts into securing the driver's title for Verstappen. So really, that mindset needs to be called upon again to ensure that Max gets his 4th world title, with Sergio Perez doing whatever he can to complicate matters for potential challengers. Note how I said that in the plural. I believe there are challengers for the title, not just Lando Norris. Charles Leclerc might be coming back into play here, now that Ferrari have gotten on top of their upgrades, and Charles Leclerc has been bolstered by winning Monaco and Monza. And seriously, Alex Jakes' commentary is absolutely mint! It's so good, it is so impactful. Chef's kiss. If things keep going the way they are right now, and Red Bull are now like fighting to get into the top 5, and Ferrari are back in the game in terms of being the 2nd fastest car, could we genuinely see a 3-way battle for the title? Not just Lando and Max, but Lando, Max and Charles. Could Oscar figure in as well? Now, I bet you're probably thinking I'm going to say yes, but I'm actually going to have to say no. I think Oscar's going to be making more of a case for 2025. Oscar will probably ultimately play the team game once McLaren actually get their act together. And that's the point I'm getting at. Perhaps Red Bull should stop developing this year's car in the traditional sense to get their heads around the 2025 car, because they are fundamentally the same, there's no big rule changes. And it is important to note that the RB20 is faster than the RB19. I've already gone over that in a previous video, that if you brought 2023's car onto this year's grid, it would barely make it into Q3. The car has made genuine progress. It is much faster than the most dominant car ever. But the thing is, though, is that all the other cars are faster than the RB19 at this point. It would be completely eviscerated if you put it toe-to-toe with the MCL38 this year. The main issue is that this year's car has not developed as rapidly as all the other competitors, and in some cases, it's gone sideways. Not necessarily gotten worse, but just like coasting, or it fixes one thing and then another problem comes along. The RB20's fundamental baseline established by Newey and Vacher was sound, even though it is claimed that Newey had nothing to do with the RB20, but it is an evolution of the RB19, as was the ethos of Adrian Newey going back decades. It's just the variations have gone awry, and it's too late in the season to even consider going back to the Suzuka specification and just resetting and starting over. That, I believe, was the last upgrade which was genuinely productive and satisfactory for Red Bull's likes and needs, and that would just lead to Red Bull falling to the same issue that Ferrari had. They went back on their developments, they lost months in terms of time and money, and we would just see Red Bull repeating the same thing and then Ferrari managing to get the leap ahead of them, just making up for lost time. It would just consign a lot of Red Bull's developments to the rubbish bin, much like with all of the bits of carbon fibre that Checo has manifested in all of the crashes that he has had. And all of the money spent on repairing and replacing parts for the car have probably eaten into the development budget quite a bit. And it also doesn't help that Red Bull has one of, if not the oldest wind tunnel on the grid, which is only now seeing a replacement being constructed. It's starting construction right now, and it won't be ready until 2027. And if McLaren's own wind tunnels phasing is anything to go by, it won't really be producing a car a fully developed machine until 2028, the final year of Max Verstappen's contract. So realistically, they brought in this development too late for Max Verstappen to make the most out of it. He might be gone by that point. He might be in his final year. He might then retire. So they won't really benefit in terms of getting the most out of man and machine in terms of one of the most successful drivers in F1. So they need to make do with their older one, which is seemingly being accused of causing correlation issues, according to Helmut Marko, which has been a genuine problem for a few teams this year in the era of ground effect. I mean, except for Haas, though, who's seen the opposite happen, where it produced better results on the track. And I bet you that Red Bull are really jealous of Haas for that fact, and that is not a sentence that you've probably heard before. I don't feel particular sympathy for this team. Red Bull really could have rectified this issue years ago, but the thing is, though, there was no real need. The momentum toward the Drivers and Constructors title was present, and it was all starting to work. But now things have suddenly just gone askew, skew-with, all weird and off, and it's now too late to try and quickly rectify it. They've now got to fix that wind tunnel problem, and if they don't, they are now going to be just left all at sea, because Mercedes have sorted themselves out, McLaren have sorted themselves out, Ferrari have sorted themselves out, Aston Martin might sort themselves out when their wind tunnel comes online, I think at the start of next year. It's very, very soon though. But Red Bull, they've been caught with their pants down, and they might just blow away in the breeze of the little wind tunnel that they already have. Which then gives me some justification to share with you a conspiracy theory that somebody tipped me off to over on the threads. Yes, I do have a threads, by the way. You can go and find me here. Because according to this theory, Red Bull are looking to throw the Constructors title in order to gain that little bit more time in the wind tunnel, to which McLaren might be aware of, and that might have manifested the Papaya Rules term, which means that they then throw the Constructors champion as well, and then they'll see the two teams opening the door for Ferrari to come in and take the glory, which they will certainly not squander if given the opportunity, since they have been starved for any trophy since 2008. And even though this has actually tickled my interest and sort of inspired me to make this video, I do have to admit that by the power of hot takes, I have opinions! I think the McLaren part is a little bit of a stretch, but the idea of Red Bull stepping back from the team title this year to get more time to figure out their car troubles and their wind tunnel woes does make more sense. Sure, they don't get the trophy this time around, but that might have been a realisation many races ago had McLaren been better at carrying out their strategies and scored more points and wins. Because in another reality out there, somewhere, McLaren might already be ahead in the Constructors and might have been ahead of Red Bull before the summer break around about the Hungarian Grand Prix, but We didn't get that. We are now at roughly race 16 or something like that, and McLaren are still behind Red Bull. They should be ahead by now simply for the fact that their two drivers are at their most optimal, and they've scored roughly the same amount of points as each other in the last few races. Because it's become clear now that this 5% extra time testing the aerodynamics of the car in an era of F1 where aero is top priority is very crucial, and the penalty in that respect Red Bull had last year wreaked more havoc than was previously believed. If they hadn't had that penalty in terms of ATR time, they might have discovered the issue a little bit earlier. That means the RB20 might have been more prepared, and they might have gotten on top of it a little bit sooner, or they might not have made it into a bigger problem as it is currently. Anyway, okay, I'm just going to put this down now, so there you go. But the time will come soon enough, though, when all the teams, especially Red Bull, have to make a call about when to stop development on the 2024 cars and move on to next year. With 4 teams in the hunt for wins, this will be a very difficult question to answer. Who blinks first? Will Red Bull have to be the ones to blink first? Because next year, they won't have the luxury, and Max won't have the luxury, of already having 7 victories in the bag and having a very comfortable gap between himself and Lando Norris. Everyone will be a lot closer from the very first Grand Prix, and there's no guarantee that Max Verstappen will start off all guns blazing and win 3 or 4 races in a row. That early domination was a luxury, and it does make you wonder what Verstappen would be saying right now if he hadn't won as many races in the first phase of the year. He probably would be a fair bit more colourful than he is right now. So, in my mind, it makes perfect sense for Red Bull to give up, because right now, they need to be thinking of what's going to be going on for 2025. Because you think that this year's gotten intense, just you wait till next year, it's going to get absolutely chaotic. And that's not just because Lewis Hamilton is going to be racing at Ferrari, and then Mercedes will have an absolute rookie in their ranks with Kimi Antonelli. No. The fact is, though, McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, they all be relatively close to one another. They won't be changing the concept of their cars because there would be no point, because the rules are going to be changed completely for 2026. If you change the car concept again, like Mercedes seems to have done, like it's almost gone out of style recently, then you'll be absolutely far behind. No, it's going to be absolutely frenetic from the get-go, and that is something I'm really excited for. They will be stuck with these machines, and the name of the game will be to find those fractional gains, as well as Red Bull ensuring that Sergio has a car that he can work with, since no teams can rely on putting all their eggs in one driver's basket right now. So would it be wise for Red Bull to get ahead whilst the other 3 teams are trapped in the Red Bull mist as of now? Because let's be real, Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, they know that a trophy is within their grasp. Red Bull are weak, they are struggling. They are not thinking about this constructors title anymore. And right now, they're all absolute crazed and manic and going, give me that constructors trophy, give it to me, give it to me! Sure, the team title isn't as sexy as the drivers one, but it matters more to the team since F1 itself is primarily a team sport. And in my mind, Red Bull deserve to lose the team title since they've really not been acting like a team, or not the team that I've grown to expect. And all of this under the watch of the man who originally brought them so much success. They become a shadow of their former selves, in terms of their integrity, solidarity, and ethos. The team's no longer about being rebels, different to the establishment, ruthless when it comes to their drivers' decisions, or even giving youngsters the proper leg up in the traditional sense. No, they've almost become the complete opposite. They've become conventional, started to dither when it comes to their drivers and their decisions, and most importantly, settling with the traditional and the samey, stick to what they know, playing it safe. That's not the Red Bull we grew up with. This year needs to be a figurative smack across the face and to cauterize the loss of key personnel in which to rebuild for the new rules coming for 2026. The reality is very plain and simple. Red Bull could wind up in 3rd place in the constructors if Ferrari get their act together, they settle themselves down, they don't really change anything fundamentally with the SF24, and they can then mount a challenge to really give McLaren a little bit of a fright, and maybe even give them a little bit of a reality check with them winning the constructors over McLaren. And if they do that, I'd almost be okay with that. And yes, Max's lot is less stressful, but it is something that he is aware of, and that in of itself is wise to consider since we are headed towards Singapore, which could become Red Bull's new worst race of the year if 2023 was anything to go by, when Max didn't even get into Q3. And focusing on next year slightly earlier than the competition might make focusing on 2026 a little bit easier as well, because there is also another question within that question. What do you do about 2026? Because you can start to develop that car again on New Year's Day 2025, and do you decide to just forget 2025 since the rules are going to change completely? Or do you just try and make do and just straddle the line between both? All of the teams will be having that same quandary. Do they bother with next year or not? The logical answer would be to do what most of the lower teams will probably do, including Williams, and that is to look to the new rules that will be valid until 2030. But the allure of victory now, it's a very powerful temptation. And with Red Bull looking vulnerable, divided, weak, and Max Verstappen realizing that both championships are not realistic right now, their rivals are going to go absolutely hell for leather, and 2025 might not be on their radar. Just that allure of glory will be too strong, and Red Bull should probably capitalize on it if they wish to address the issue with the RB20 going into the RB21, and then make sure they can actually give Max Verstappen the car that he needs to go for a 5th world title, and Red Bull to be with a realistic shout of the constructors title, because if they are going to keep Checo, they need to give him a good car from the start, or if they're going to replace him, whoever's going to replace him, they have a good car that can work with them as well as Max. And if you want to go even deeper, this could play into the hands of Aston Martin as well, because they are making an announcement in a press conference next week, and it might be having something to do with a certain Adrian Newey, and whether or not he might be joining them. To find out why I think the team's multi-million-dollar plan might pay off for them in the long run, you should go and watch this video next, which I made a couple of months ago, which is still just as valid, and why I've not been talking about it, well, not even now, when it's become even more of a reality. Ooh.